Good evening, everyone. Hello. Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay, lovely. We're good? Good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for a very special, intimate, and robust, both those things at the same time, evening with a pair of essayists that I have been lovingly referring to these past few weeks as the Melissas. For the last month, in fact, I have found myself more than once chanting in idle moments while folding the laundry or walking the dogs, "The Melissas are coming. The Melissas are coming," which Melissa Faliveno at one point jokingly suggested could be the basis of a very rad, very enticing work of queer horror. But indeed, the Melissas are here, and we're so honored to be hosting them this evening for our second Beck Series Visiting Writer event of the year. Tonight is also very special because it is the first opportunity that I've had as a new faculty member here in the English department at Denison to identify young writers whose work centers around and engages similar ideas and themes, among them concepts of gender and identity, and who took particular interest and influence in reading and discussing the Melissa's work. And I have asked these young writers to do us the honor of formally introducing each writer this evening. So my personal thanks to Sophia Monteleone, who will be introducing Melissa Faliveno, and to Mary Hodgkins, who will be introducing Melissa Febos. Before I turn things over to these budding young essayists, I want to offer my thanks to the Melissas, of course, as well, for joining us, to the students and faculty and staff who had a hand in planning and orchestrating this event, and to all of you for making events like this one possible. Following tonight's readings, there will be a Q&A, and we also invite you to purchase copies of both Melissa's books, which will be available for sale and signing via our campus bookstore in the back. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Sophia Monteleone, who will be introducing Melissa Faliveno.
Okay. Hi. I'm going to slightly lower this, because I'm a little short. So I have the honor this evening to introduce the first of our two guest writers, who is an individual that for many of you needs no introduction, yet she absolutely deserves it. So here it is anyway. I will try. As many of you know, Melissa Faliveno was a part of our community for a brief period of time, and while I never got the opportunity to work with her, I spent my first 2 years listening to upperclassmen rave about her classes and senior projects that she was helping shepherd into the world. In reading her essay, Driftless, for my nonfiction class with Professor Crowley last semester, I came across the line, "When I get there, I'll take a train to the ocean. I'll stand in salt water and sit in the sand, a great glittering city behind me, my home in a past life just out of view, a reminder that we are driftless too." And that was the moment I decided, this is how I want to write. In that essay, I could feel my hands grasping at those train doors that Faliveno rides alongside the people that she whispers her secrets about. I could smell that salt water and feel the dust of the driftless region. And when I imagined that past life out of view, I saw where I came from, my small Mississippi town of red clay and soybean fields, the past life I had rejected and accepted and wrestled with, and I felt driftless too. I resonated with Faliveno's we so strongly that I knew I wanted to capture that. I want my stories and language and obsessions to reach across time and touch others the way that Faliveno's work touched me. More recently, my class, Poetics of the Body, which is Professor Kolchinsky's class, have been discussing Faliveno's essays at length and exploring her methods of looking at obsessions, the things in our lives that we return to over and over and over again, and the reportage that she uses to illustrate the stories of her home and the people that she has encountered across her life, and her incorporation of literature that connects her essays to a broader literary conversation. I can only describe Faliveno's work as taking the reader to a space of liminality, which, as some of you may recognize, is language ripped off the back of the book. But it's very true. Faliveno wrestles with what is and isn't binary, acceptable or understood, yet grounds her work in the temporal and beautifully composed landscapes of home, whatever definition that might take. From the mountain walled town of her Midwestern hometown to her old, moth-infested New York apartment. Tomboyland let me feel this thread between my life and the lives of people whose identities and experiences feel out of bounds and indefinable, expressed across time, and let me, at a point in my life where everything has felt in flux, a sense of understanding. And I hope that when, not if, but when, you'll read the book, you will feel like that too. Unsurprisingly, Melissa Faliveno is a unique individual accomplished in about every way that qualifies. She's published work in Esquire, in the Paris Review, in a long list of other renowned literary publications. She's formerly the senior editor of Poets and Writers magazine. She's taught creative writing here, at Kenyon, at Sarah Lawrence, and is currently an assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill. She's also a singer and a guitarist, which is like really, really cool. So without further ado, please welcome Melissa Faliveno.
Y'all, this room is amazing. I say y'all now because I live in North Carolina. Thank you so, where are you? Thank you so much for that introduction. You almost made me cry. It's, okay, let's make this happen here. It's so good to be here and to be back at Denison. This is really special for me. And just to see this room packed with so many people is just a really, can you hear me? Do I need to be louder, closer? Hold up. We're gonna do that. And we're gonna do that. How's that? Okay, cool, great, yeah. It's just such a joy to be back here at Denison and to see all of your faces. I'm super excited to be here alongside one of my favorite essayists and writers. And it's just a real joy. So thank you for coming out on a Monday night right before your fall break. I know that you're probably super busy. Thank you for people who came from far and wide to be here. I really appreciate you. So I'm gonna read a couple things. I am gonna read from Tomboyland. I'm actually gonna read a little bit of Driftless. And then I'm going to read something brand new. Yeah, I'm going to take this coat off because it's hot in here. So we were talking in class today in the creative nonfiction workshop about writing plays, which is, I'm seeing so many faces I recognize. This is so cool. We were talking about writing place and writing about the places we come from and how to do that. And we were talking a little bit about this idea of, or I was talking about this idea of like not being able to write about the places that mean the most to us until we leave them, which is really true for me as a writer. And this whole book is about growing up in the Midwest, specifically in Wisconsin, and about kind of my relationship to this place and the land and my body in that land and of that land, and then outside of it. So I wasn't able to write this book until I left, until I lived in New York. And now, perhaps predictably, that I don't live in Ohio, after living in Ohio for a couple years, I find myself writing about Ohio. So one thing that I kind of want to point to is that I often think, I talk with my own students about this all the time, about kind of there's an anxiety around putting something down that changes, right? Like we put these stories down on the page. What happens when our experiences or our minds or our lives change? And I think that that's not a limitation in creative nonfiction, that it's actually an opportunity that you can put these little pieces of yourself on the page as a document of who you were when you wrote it, or who you were in the past. And we keep doing that as writers, right? And we keep creating these little documents of who we are in whatever place we live, often writing about the places that we came from. So what hopefully you'll see in the new piece that I read is it has some resonance with the piece that I'm going to read from here. And that like this whole project of writing is a continuum that we're constantly just putting our lives down as they change. And that should feel kind of liberating. So this is just a couple sections from my essay Driftless, which is a braided essay. So I'm going to kind of show you how the braids are working. Okay, are you ready? Driftless. There's an epigraph. Now by the path I climbed, I journey back. The oaks have grown, I have been long away. In the summer of '89, it barely rained. More than 50 days passed without a drop. The corn dried up. The crops didn't yield. Acres of farmland turned brown in the sun. Neighbors and livestock died in the heat. Wildfires tore across the plains. But we were too young to worry, to know what the word drought could mean to a small Midwestern town like ours, or the miles of farmland that surrounded it. We spent our days in the fields and woods, the sun high and bright through the leaves. We traveled in packs. We wandered alone. We were great in number. We were two at a time. We scuffed up our jeans, scraped up our knees, tore holes in shirts that got snagged on branches. We climbed the trees and yelled into the wind, and no one heard but us. We ran for miles, the dry summer grasses nicking our shins, trying to find the place where land met sky. We hiked through the goldenrod up to our waists, our eyes swelling and legs itching, and laid down to watch the clouds move east. And then we walked back the way we came, outlines of our bodies on the ground behind us, bright yellow dust on our skin. We were people of the prairie. We were people of the trees. We were the maple and birch, the oak and elm. We were the corn and wheat and soy. We were the black earth that grew it. We were blue stem and switchgrass. We were rivers and lakes. And out past the horizon of hardwood and pine, we were mountains. We were girls. We were boys. We were neither and both. We were small. We were nothing. We were taller than the trees. In southwestern Wisconsin, where I grew up, there exists a geological phenomenon. It's called the Driftless area, a narrow stretch of land that somewhat miraculously was bypassed by the last continental glacier. What results is a strange, rare terrain that extends some 20,000 square miles, composed primarily of that small corner of the state and edging over the borders of Iowa, Minnesota, and Illinois. Its name refers to drift, rocks and gravel, silt and clay and sand, the sediment left in the wake of retreating glaciers. It's the stuff that exists beneath the surface of most terrain. But here, in the driftless area, such elemental makeup is scarce when it exists at all. The upper Midwest owes much of its landscape to the movement of the glaciers. Minnesota's 10,000 lakes, carved from the earth by walls of ice and filled with water, the long rolling prairies of south central Wisconsin and northern Illinois. But the driftless area, also known as the Paleozoic Plateau, is marked instead by a landscape wholly unlike the rest of the region. That of rolling hills and steep forested hillsides that stretch down to valleys, sharp limestone cliffs and bedrock outcroppings with lakes and quarries beneath them, paths cut by winding rivers and cold water streams. If you look to the horizon, you'll see the most striking part of the region, small mountains or mounds, and among them, monadnocks, strange, solitary peaks that seem to rise up out of nowhere from the middle of the plain. These are the tops of ancient mountains, whole ranges long buried beneath the surface of the earth. After generations of erosion, when layers of softer rock have been washed away in the formation of surrounding valleys, the harder rock is all that remains, emerging from the earth as isolated mountains. The mountains shouldn't be here. They're incongruous, out of place. They're an anomaly, an abnormality, a glitch in the system. They're also beautiful. The landscape of Wisconsin is both forest and farm, lands both flat and rolling. It is endless prairie and deep, untouched woods. It is a place of lakes both great and small, of rivers, creeks, and streams. It's a place whose lands are neither one thing nor the other, a whole containing multitudes. But the mountains, they're not quite right. Amid the rest of the landscape, it would seem clear to someone first encountering them that they just don't belong. This was the landscape that made me. In the summer of '98, we drank pilfered beer in unfinished basements. We stayed up late and cut our fingers with scissors, pressing them together until our pulses beat in time. We snuck out to the softball field just before sunrise, the sky a blaze of black and blue. We ran the bases, our legs wobbly, the sand and rock beneath the mud, our bare feet slapping against the cold slick of it. We passed a bottle between us, taking long pulls like old pros, like we watched so many people do before us. We rolled our bodies like barrels down the hill to center field, where cleat marks were carved in cold earth, where the ghosts of mosquitoes still buzzed. We breathed hard, our backs on the ground, our knees and elbows slick with sand, our bodies close but not touching. Silent as the sky before a storm. We were girls, but not yet women. We were something in between. We were 15. We were on fire. Our skin was hot all the time, buzzing and open and raw, like it could be peeled off entirely, a whole girl-shaped shell, like the thin shedding vellum of a sunburn. To quiet the constant itch of it, we did everything we could to feel something else, to feel anything at all. We drank, we fought, we went without sleep. We lay on our backs on bedroom floors and turned the music up loud, longing to be the subjects of love songs. We talked on the phone late into the night, the long pink coil of cords wrapped around fingers and wrists. Breasts smashed into sports bras, dirt beneath black painted nails. We were starting to think about the power our bodies might hold. We did not yet know of the power they lacked or that which could be taken. We tried on skirts, and our shirts got tighter. We shaved our legs and hairsprayed our bangs and painted our eyes. We rode with boys in pickup trucks out into the country, the summer wind in our hair. We started kissing those boys, and sometimes let them go further. We might have dreamed of kissing girls, though none of us had the words for it yet. We ached for everything, and for anything other than this. The slow, quiet life of our small hometown, its stillness and silence, the feeling that we were stuck. We knew that somewhere, beyond this place, the whole huge world was waiting. So I'll stop there with that one. Oh, thank you. Thanks. So the piece goes on from there, and it braids between this kind of like more scientific or environmental language and style, talking about the landscape, and then a lot more about growing up in that place. So now I'm just going to read one more short thing, and it's it's really new, so forgive me. This hopefully will be in another essay collection that exists in the world. But yeah, I started writing this. I lived in Ohio for 2 years, and then I left Ohio, and then I started writing about Ohio because I missed it. Okay. Driving around central Ohio in my dad's '07 Chevy, listening to the CDs of my youth, or Put the Past Away, or August and Everything After. So quick poll, does anyone know the band Counting Crows? Okay, yeah. How about Third Eye Blind? Yes, okay. All right, this is good. Good job, Mom. This is for you. I'm driving around central Ohio in my dad's '07 Chevy, listening to the CDs of my youth. I'm not sure how I got here. Okay, that's a lie. I know exactly how I got here. I can trace the miles this trailblazer has traveled, all the state lines it's crossed. What I mean is I don't know how I got to this place, so much like the one I came from, a place to which I once swore I'd never return. The '07 Chevy is named Betsy, or Bets for short. She's got some rust on her body, and her electronics are starting to fail. She's just shy of 300,000 miles. My dad sold her to me for $1, and we thought she'd last me a year, but she'll end up lasting me 3. My dad has a way with cars. He treats them sweet, keeps them like new clean, gives them names right away. In the summers when I was a kid, we washed them by hand in the driveway. He sprayed me with the hose, and I chased the suds, danced in a rainbow of sun. He let me dry, and I ran a chamois over those gleaming chrome bodies, gentle and careful to leave no streaks, wiping away my fingerprints. I never had any siblings, and I don't have any kids. I've never bathed another small body in a tub. Maybe my dad's cars were the closest I got. I make promises to myself that I'll be as good as him, that I'll take care of what's mine as well as he did. It's a promise I can't seem to keep. Betts has a 6-disc changer. When I went home to Wisconsin to collect her, I found a box of CDs gathering dust under my parents' pool table, mostly indie bands from my early 20s, Arcade Fire, Cat Power, Neutral Milk Hotel, of course. I don't know what happened to the CDs that came before them, gone, I suppose, to some great leather Case Logic in the sky. At a used record store in Columbus for $3.99 a pop, I find 2 of my favorite CDs as a teenager. Albums I wore out in a different Chevy, a Cavalier. CDs I played on repeat through scratches and skips, knowing every word by heart the way I knew the roads. The Counting Crows, August and Everything After, and one of the most perfect rock albums ever recorded, Third Eye Blind's 1997 self-titled debut, And I'll Die on This Hill. I slide them into the slot, listen to the 6-disc click and whir, and the first track, Losing a Whole Year, starts to play. I think of how quickly time seems to be passing these days, how fast the years have been falling away. 12 years earlier, when I moved from Wisconsin to New York, my dad lent me Betts for the drive. I was 26, and she was 2. It was August, and she carried me and my writing desk 1,000 miles east. The man I loved then, who I lived with by the lake, with his daughter, who was 6 and then 10 and then 12, drove with me. Then we said goodbye, and he and Betts drove those 1,000 miles back home, away from me, alone. And now it's August again, and those 12 years have passed in one bright high beam flash, and I've left New York, and I find myself in central Ohio, driving around in my dad's '07 Chevy, listening to the CDs of my youth, and I'm 38, and I'm 16, and the last track ends, and the CD changes, and now Adam Duritz's high nasal wail is all desperation and longing, and I'm searching along with him for something I can't yet name, and somehow I've never left home. My commute is all back roads, just like it was then, and I leave before the sun, see it rise over the hills, mist hanging above cornfields still tall and green. It's a trap, they say, to be lulled by nostalgia, that hazy scrim of the past, where objects in the mirror are closer than they appear, where the pale pink light of dusk plays tricks. But as I drive, listening to the CDs I played on repeat as a kid on roads just like these, I let myself be lulled. I remember how it felt to be 16, stuck in the middle of nowhere and dying to leave, trying so hard to stay. Betts is falling apart. I guess maybe I am too. But somehow for now we both hold on. I roll the windows down even as they start to stick. Keep them down when the AC kicks. I turn the volume up. Some inexplicable high-pitched hum rings out over the sound, like the tinnitus I developed in the city. I sing along as the side mirror falls off, and I duct tape it back on. I sing as the speedometer fails, as the tailgate jams, and the dome light stays on, as the battery dies and needs to be jumped each time I drive. The record plays from beginning to end, and the CD changes, and it's Stephen Jenkins again, and time is rushing onward, and everything will change, and he's asking, can you put the past away? But I'm listening for the first time at 15 with a boy who played the violin and got busted stealing rims from a used car lot, who would park his Beretta on darkened small town side streets, and we'd listen while we kissed. It's the deep cuts I love most. The background, motorcycle drive-by, God of Wine. But today, Jumper's on. It's one of the hits, but it's hitting. And Stephen is asking me to step back from that ledge. But the truth is that I like it out here, teetering between then and now and whatever's next, tilting at the wind. Soon, this Midwestern summer will fade to fall, and the corn will be cut down to spikes, making way for winter. 2 years will pass, and I'll turn 40. And one night, driving home, I'll crest a hill and hit a deer, the first time after a lifetime of driving dark Midwestern roads like these. Bets will protect me, though. Nothing but a bent fender and a cracked headlight, not a scratch on me. The deer will not fare so well. I'll leave Ohio, taking bets on one last long drive, hundreds of miles south, across more state lines, to another new place, far away from here, further from home. I'll wonder if she'll make it. I worry that she won't, but she will. And then I'll trade her in for a newer car, leave her alone in the lot to be stripped for parts, watch her disappear in the rear view as I drive away. The new car will have a single CD player, but I won't use it. Something about listening to the songs of my youth will start to feel old in this new place, and anyway, I won't know the roads. The box of CDs will gather dust again. By then, in another August, I'll have asked the man I loved, my friend, to step back from the ledge he's been standing on his whole life, but he'll jump. He'll outlast bets by only a month. When I see his daughter at the funeral, she'll be 26, the same age I was when I left her and him and home. I'll tell her that I'm sorry, that I wished I'd taken better care of them both. The new car will get dirty and stay that way. A year later, she still won't have a name. But I don't know any of this yet. For now, it's still August in central Ohio, and Bets and I take the back roads, and they carry us on, and the corn is still tall and green, and the Midwestern horizon is endless. We're all still here, with the windows down, suspended somewhere between then and now, and the CDs of my youth are still spinning, and the sun's just coming up. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Hodgkins, and I'm a sophomore creative writing major here at Denison. I'm very humbled to have the privilege of introducing the esteemed Melissa Febos. My experience of reading Melissa's work began in my Poetics of the Body class, where we read her collection of essays, Girlhood. In sum, Melissa's work is the shovel to the past that we try to bury. As I read, my younger self sat with me, reading over my shoulder. She leaned in with every line, her breath brushing at the back of my neck. Girlhood brings the reader through Melissa's growing up. She walks us through the woods behind her home, the Kettle Hole Lake she swam in, and the school bus she rode each morning. She invites us into her conversations, spills secrets from her diary entries. Melissa confides in the reader her body. The experience of reading these essays is a deeply intimate one. Febos' writing invokes the parts of growing up a woman we tend to shy away from. In the closing essay, Les Calanques, Febos writes of her past self coming to mind, even when she writes of the present moment. I sense her there, Febos recalls, like a language I cannot speak but have not forgotten. Febos' reckoning with her past obliges the reader to do the same, to sit with this unforgotten language and the discomfort of sexuality, body image, and the reckoning that is so often growing up as a woman. It is a rewarding and meaningful task. Melissa Febos' complete list of literary accomplishments would likely take this entire hour to recite. Instead, I offer a by no means exhaustive list of her accolades. She is notably the author of 4 books. Her essay collection, Girlhood, is a national bestseller, received the National Book Critics Circle Award in Criticism, and was named a notable book of 2021 by NPR, Time, The Washington Post, among others. Her 5th book, The Dry Season, is set to be released on June 3rd, 2025. Her work has appeared in a myriad of publications, including The New Yorker, The Sun, The Kenyon Review, The New York Times Magazine, Vogue, Elle, The Paris Review, and more. She is a recipient of a 2022 Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship, a 2022 National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship, and she is a 4-time MacDowell Fellow. Currently, she is a full-time professor in the nonfiction writing program at the University of Iowa. I know I'm incredibly excited to hear some more beautiful writing, and I trust all of you feel the same. So, without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Melissa Febos.
Thank you so much. Y'all are good at writing introductions. I heard that myriad you slipped in there. Hold on, let me get myself situated. Hi. How's it going? Are you guys hot? If anybody needs to stretch, I can put my glasses on really slowly. You're good. Get comfortable. Get comfortable. First of all, I want to thank Melissa Faliveno, my pal, for reading here with me and for writing such slammin' essays. That was so good. And it's scary to read new work and so thrilling. So I'm really grateful. I'm also going to read some new work. And yeah, I want to thank everyone who made it possible for us to be here. And all of you for coming. So being a memoirist is like the most awkward job ever. Almost everything I have ever written started off as something I was too embarrassed to even say out loud, even like to my therapist. And the amazing thing about writing or making art out of your experience is that one of the ways that I know I'm done writing about something is that my relationship to it is totally changed. So something that felt like 1,000% cringe. Are you guys still saying cringe, or do I need to update it? Yeah? Okay. Is something I actually get excited to share with people afterwards. And that would have been impossible to imagine at the outset of the process. So all of that is just a preface to say that the scene I'm going to read to you is the scene that opens my new book, The Dry Season, which comes out in June. And it started as just a line that said, I tried to seduce this woman on a plane. And someone read some early pages and was like, how did you do that? And I was like, some things should not be put to words, Ethan. Like, I can't imagine how mortifying to describe what that process actually is. Wouldn't even know. I can't even put it to words myself, but I did. And now I'm going to read it to you. So, content warning, I say the word masturbation later, so just prepare yourselves. There was this woman on my flight to London. I see her 4 rows behind me, tousled hair in a wool beanie, leather boots belonging to the category worn only by lesbians and Dickensian orphans, giant backpack. Thank you for laughing. I feel myself begin to glow with a chemistry visible only to the object of my attention. I don't understand the biological protocol that enacts once it's triggered, but I do know that more often than not, the end result is sex. And if my past is any indication, some sort of romantic entanglement. Just a few months earlier, I would have lurched at the call, but I am halfway through a year-long promise to myself to stay celibate. In the first months, I was more vulnerable to the familiar siren song of acute dyke, though I'd managed to stay the course. The editor at the fancy book party, the film director, all the loose ends and rain checks with whom I'd cut off contact months ago. But here I am, turning my profile to the angle mathematically most likely for her to see me, rolling my shirt cuffs up to bear a few inches of forearm tattoos, dangling my hand with its short, unvarnished nails into the aisle. Just a little pornography for you there. Like most femmes, I am an expert at signaling my queerness through physical clues legible only to other queers. I can communicate my sexual identity through the set of my shoulders if I must. I sit in the cramped airplane seat with my legs comfortably spread, my elbows on both armrests, exuding a physical entitlement to the space I occupy. So much of heterosexual attraction is contingent on the minimization and infantilization of the female body. Crossed legs, tilted heads, widened eyes, slackened mouths. A disregard for this affect suggests that a woman's desires lie elsewhere. This is why it's so easy to mistake some women who have gone through menopause for lesbians. They both stopped giving a fuck what men think of them. The secret language and all its permutations drove and defined over 2 decades of my life. I finally gotten comfortable in my abstinence from it. But then I think, we're on a flight to London and unlikely to come any closer to one another than the 4 rows of seats now between us. There's no harm in indulging the pleasure of the dance. We land at London Gatwick, and the attractive stranger gathers her belongings, runs a hand through her messy hair, and yes, glances in my direction before she rises to her feet and steps into the aisle. Goodbye, stranger, I think, with some relief. To my great surprise, the past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. It wasn't happiness that I sought in celibacy. I had just gotten so tired. I met my first girlfriend when I was 15 and spent the next 20 years in relationships. There were a few periods of singleness, but I was never alone, really. Once I reached my 30s, I started having moments of unease when I contemplated this pattern. I was just a relationship person, I told myself. I had spent my happiest times partnered, I thought, without considering the givenness of that, having spent most of my life partnered. I was reassured by the fact that I never felt afraid to be alone. I never considered how one might not ever feel the things she had successfully outrun. Then I spent 2 years in a ravaging maelstrom of a relationship. When I finally emerged, I thought I should take a break. After this revelation, I promptly got into 5 brief consecutive entanglements. Each had a frantic tinge, like the last handful of popcorn you cram into your mouth after you decide to stop eating it. I realized that my resolution would have to be more intentional. Already, my life has opened up like a mansion half of whose rooms had been locked. There is so much more space in which to live. I anticipated that I would miss the thrill of seduction, but that urge has come and gone, never surging strong or long enough to compel me from observation to animation until today. The customs queue is interminable, but I'm distracted by the inching undulation of the line as it snakes forward, delivering my crush and me past each other by mere feet at regular intervals. Both of us studiously rotate between staring at our phones, squinting ahead at the front of the line, and posing in such subtle affectations that no casual observer would discern anything other than boredom or frustration in either of our compartments. It might seem arrogant for me to assume that my airplane crush reciprocates my attention, but trust me that when you've been performing this choreography for more than 20 years, you know when your partner feels the music and when she doesn't. The first decade was spent being humiliatingly mistaken a good portion of the time while I cultivated this precise radar, but in the years since, it hasn't led me astray. The thrill, of course, resides in the slender possibility that this time, I might be wrong. She reaches the booth 10 or 15 people ahead of me, and despite devoting a valorous 12 minutes to backpack reorganization and another 3 to tightening her shoelaces, she has left no other option but to continue on her journey. My disappointment as she disappears into the airport is matched by the return of relief. The spell is broken. I have not violated my abstinence. I dig my passport out of my jacket's interior pocket and shuffle forward, happily bored, mistaken once again in my certainty that temptation has passed. Soon after I got sober at 23, my sponsor told me I couldn't steal anymore. She probably would have told me this sooner if she'd known I was still stealing things, mostly books from the Barnes & Noble in Union Square and bags of food from the self-serve bins at the overpriced health food store, RIP Healthy Pleasures. But I'd never mentioned it until I happened to be on the phone with her as I walked to my building's laundry room and found that someone had left a stack of quarters on the table by the change machine. I can take them, right? I asked her. No, she said, we don't steal. I felt awash in relief at this. I used to get a terrible wave of dread right before I stole, as if someone else was making me do it. I wasn't addicted to stealing. It was a habit I'd gotten into as an addict who was always broke. But necessity had been replaced by the inertia of habit. It hadn't occurred to me that I could give myself permission to stop. Incredibly, after I have navigated the swarmed airport, retrieved my massive suitcase from baggage claim, ridden the shuttle to the adjacent train station, deciphered the cryptic train tables and British accents, purchased my ticket from a reluctant kiosk, and arrived at the correct platform, there she is, the woman from the plane. She glances up, probably sensing my stunned stare, sees me, looks momentarily stunned herself, and then looks away. We don't make eye contact again, but stand a few yards apart on the platform, waiting for our train. I hold very still, as if it will quell the tumult inside me. I have fleeting, stupid thoughts, like maybe it is fate, and who am I to defy the fates? Or maybe in a foreign country, it doesn't count as violating my abstinence. I think of St. Augustine, though I find him simpering, and the pears he stole as a teen with his ne'er-do-well friends. Doing this pleased us all the more because it was forbidden, he wrote in his Confessions. Such was my heart, O God, such was my heart, which thou didst pity even in that bottomless pit. I think of how when I was a child, my appetites were so great that my parents used to sometimes refer to me as a bottomless pit. I loved my own undoing, wrote Augustine, and I do know what he meant, the ecstasy of yielding to the forbidden. The train finally pulls up to the platform, whipping my hair around my face. We board the same car from different doors. Again, I settle 4 or 5 rows ahead of her. My body feels rubbery with exhaustion, but buzzy, animated by the prospect that something is going to happen. Amazing, the resiliency of this excitement, as if I haven't lived through what happens many times before. I haven't felt it in so long, this nervous attention to my body and its environs. I've always told myself that it is waking, this feeling, but is that right? At the moment, it feels just a few clicks away from fear. At 40, while her interest in friendship grew increasingly compelling, Virginia Woolf wrote to a friend that sexual relations bore me more than they used to. I've come to the conclusion that love is a disease, a frenzy, an epidemic. Oh, but how dull, how monotonous, and reducing its young men and women to what abysses of mediocrity. How ironic that I have momentarily succumbed to the abyss of mediocrity at this particular moment, for I have come to London to follow the trail of my celibate role models, beginning with Woolf. In a few days, I'll leave London for Germany's Rhine Valley, where I'll visit Hildegard von Bingen's Benedictine Abbey. Like Woolf, Hildegard lived a life devoted to her art. The medieval German polymath was just as prolific as the modernist and called her own work the living light. She claimed visions from early childhood, though no one particularly cared until she was about my age. As soon as her direct line to God was finally recognized by the church, she announced that God had commanded her, "Make known the wonders you live, put them in writing, and speak." Convenient for an artist who would have had no other path to a life based in creative practice other than one prescribed by God himself. Like that of most nuns, the goal of von Bingen's celibacy was ostensibly to relate to God. How then, I keep wondering, did she write the first description of a female orgasm? True story. How did she know the sense of heat in her brain? How the woman's sexual organs contract and all the parts that are ready to open during the time of menstruation now close in the same way as a strong man can hold something enclosed in his fist. Perhaps for her, erotic ecstasy was a metaphor for the spiritual rather than the inverse, as I often hope. Or maybe she was just a lesbian feminist separatist before you could be such a thing, the original art nun. One of the early revelations of the past months has been that celibacy and ecstasy are not mutually exclusive. After close consideration, I determined in the first month that masturbation would not violate the terms of my abstinence. The ecstasy of orgasm was not the sort I needed respite from. My need for celibacy has more to do with performance than it does with pleasure, the ways I have molded myself around the desires of others. My practice of self-pleasure predates that of sexual performance. It's a relationship I formed with myself before I ever formed a sexual relationship with another person. It's hardly even lust that propels my masturbation. I've never been a light candles around the bathtub type of masturbator. I'm more of an eat a bag of chips type of masturbator, a procrastinator. I see my people are in attendance. As there are plural celibacies, so there are plural ecstasies.
When I strip away the great swells of feeling that obscure it, I can see how those habitually compelled by the ecstasy of attraction are almost robotic in their pursuit, like sex Roombas. Having become an observer rather than a participant in this dynamic for the past 6 months, I have come to understand that it is not a compliment to be pursued by a sex Roomba. The starkness of this fact disturbs me, as if I have suddenly recognized the smell of ammonia, as if I have just realized that money is nothing but paper. Now, when certain people flirt with me, it is so clear that they don't see me. They see only a source of what promises to slake their thirst, but never will. They are, as the etymology of ecstasy indicates, outside themselves, outside of the place where true empathy resides. Of course, by they, I mean me, for most of my life. We have never been in this together. We've only each been alone in the same place with the same goal. As I count the dwindling stops until my destination and stare uncomprehending at the book in my lap, my nerves increase. I glance back over the heads of reading passengers and sleeping children gently nodding with the motion of the train car. The stranger's face is tilted toward the window, outside of which a field and then a small pond glide by. But I see the flicker of attention to my movement and feel the hum of the invisible cord between us, its subtle electricity, though I sense that she will not be the one to act. I know how to do this. The right kind of question to break the silence, the conversation to follow, the casual invitation to meet up later. I haven't missed many of these opportunities in the past. Especially when I was younger, I kissed a lot of strangers. In more recent years, I've collected friends that sat like simmering pots, maintaining the warm promise of consummation if I ever got hungry enough. But something is different, intercepting the usual broadcast like the song of a nearby radio station, snippets of a chorus that I begin to recognize. My excitement is a kind of anxiety. I am anxious because I do not want to consummate this flirtation. I know what lies at the end of the story, and it is either predictable or ruinous. I don't want to find out which. I want to exit this train and get a cab alone. I want to release myself from this nervous bondage. And suddenly, I realize that I can. I let the cord go slack. I let it go completely and feel her begin to drift away. I retrieve my attention from its locus 5 rows behind me and feel the shift inside as I return, my senses sharpened. It's as if I've removed a set of headphones from my ears and the music of my craving stops. Now I can hear the murmur of the other passengers in the train car and feel the churn of our motion against the tracks, the subtle rush of blood surging away from my heart into my hands. Here I am. Thank you so much. I think we're going to do a little Q&A, if y'all are up for it.
I'm just going to try to body surf up here. Maybe on the way back.
It always feels kind of cruel to go straight to Q&A. I never know what I think about anything because I'm such a passive audience member. So we can just sit and stare at each other for a minute if you want.
Yeah, okay.
In your piece in the paper of God, this is more of a silly question, but you talk about Twister.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the new Twister?
I thought you'd never ask. You know what's funny is that I had no expectations, so I went in thinking it was gonna suck, and I loved it. It was like it's not the original; it'll never be the original. It's not a classic, but I feel like they did justice to the spirit of the movie, and it was fun. It was a romp. It was a wild ride. So I really liked it. I was surprised how much I liked it. The question was how I felt about Twisters. That was important. Thank you.
Hi.
start that.
Sure, I'll start. I guess any essay of mine that has research in it, you can assume there's at least 10 times more research that I read than belongs in there. Like, I'm a very curious person, so I like to read about things, but there's a relatively tiny percentage of that actually can be put into an essay and sort of earn its keep and not just make it boring. And I'm like allergic to being bored, so I don't have any business stuffing too much research into things and making them boring. So I really try to be hard on myself with that. But I do have a good time doing the research, and yeah, it's a lot. How about you?
Same. I love researching, but I also have to stop myself. And the question that kind of comes up is like, okay, am I avoiding the writing now? And usually the answer is yes. And if the answer is yes, then I know that it's time to start writing and stop researching. But I will say that researching is like almost always leads me down a path of new discovery. And so I let it be that. I just kind of go down the rabbit holes. I love a rabbit hole. Encourage you to go down the rabbit holes all the time. You'll find really cool, weird stuff there.
Yeah, okay, I have a question for
Totally.
That's a great question. Did y'all hear the question? Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I mean, the simplest answer is that I want to. Like, there are so many terrifying things that I also want to do, right? And so much of learning to write is just learning to develop an ear for yourself and to differentiate between kind of an eager fear and like a legit fear, which is your psyche trying to protect you from something that might be dangerous. So when it feels not thrilling, just scary, or when I start to dissociate, like when something is too much, I'm really good at just piecing out inside myself. And good writing doesn't come from a vacant writer. And so if I can stay in myself and stay interested, even if it's just little bits, then I just keep going as long as I can. And when it feels like I can't stay present with the work and I'm feeling sort of threatened or menaced by it, then I stop. And I think a really important sort of footnote, and maybe not a footnote, maybe this is the main note to that, is that I never try to do it alone. Like, I don't try to do anything alone. It takes, like, you would not imagine the team of mental health professionals that support this work, okay? It's like multiple 12-step recovery programs, couples therapists, individual therapists, like Pilates teachers, lots of very close friends that I speak honestly with. Like, it's not small. Like, I am a very high maintenance person in terms of mental health, and writing is part of that, but it's also what makes the writing possible.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Did everyone hear that question? Okay. I think that I actually I'm drawn toward the braided essay because of like attention span. Honestly, I get a little tired of what I'm writing and I'm like, asterisk, and then I'm going to try something else. And now I'm going to try something else. And I just kind of let myself be sort of messy and all over the place and like peripheral and following all the associations and tangents. And then at a certain point, I have to reel it in and find some balance and figure out if the braid is even serving the essay or if it's just distraction. Sometimes it's just distraction. But it's really in the process of revision that I find the balance. And I think like how, do they have to carry the same weight or similar weight, or can one kind of piece of this thread show up here and there, or do I have to carry it forth throughout the piece? So that's when kind of that balance happens. But then in that process of revision, I'm kind of going through the piece as a whole and really thinking about it holistically, as parts that need to serve the other parts, if that makes sense. Do you have any notes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll add just a tiny bit to that. I mean, I wish the way you described it sounds so much easier than it actually is. Like, I sit down, I'm like, I'm going to write a braided essay, and it's going to have this strand and this strand and this strand. Should I write them first, or should I just do it one piece at a time? And I think I have the fantasy that it's going to be like that when I sit down to do it, but it is so much longer and much more convoluted. And I don't even know it's going to be a braided essay or how many parts it's going to have. I am just adding pieces as they're relevant to the thing I'm trying to create. And I just keep following that vision as it gets clear. And, I did this really interesting exercise recently as part of a class where I took a really big braided essay I'd written, and I highlighted all of the different strands in different colors. And it was almost like a perfect pattern. Like, they were and I was like, amazing. If only I could write it that way. But it's like the inverse of that. It's like the hardest possible way you can imagine to do that, because writing is not a transcription process or putting a puzzle together. It's a thought process, right? It's like a literal transformation process. And so I have to live it before I can put it on the page. I used to not be able to breathe. I mean, I've always been kind of an extrovert, but not in front of an audience, just like in front of my family. Like, we were a family where, like, making my mom laugh just felt like the best thing ever, but put me in, I tried to take an acting class once and just wanted to absolutely die immediately. No, I used to get this thing where my breath would be really shallow and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And then I just kept doing it. And it went away. And now I don't get nervous at all unless I have, like, biological family members in the audience. That's like the only time I get nervous. It really just with practice. And it really is that thing that I said at the beginning of my reading, where there is something truly wondrous about having a secret that you feel shame about and making art out of it and no longer feeling ashamed about it and getting to read it into a microphone to strangers and, like, they laugh with you about it. It's incredible. Like, I can't recommend it highly enough.
I still get nervous sometimes. It hasn't, like, sometimes I'm not nervous at all and it's fine. And I do this all the time. And then sometimes inexplicably I get up and I'm like, oh, why is my heart beating so fast? I don't know why. Sometimes it does, but it helps me to, like, slow down and imagine that I'm just kind of telling the story to friends and really, like, be in the story and think of it as, like, this immersive storytelling and not like I'm not performing. I mean, it is a performance, but I want it to feel like you're there with me. So that kind of helps sometimes, but it's hard. It takes practice for sure.
Great question.
Yes.
I will say I spent many years hiding in the things I was good at or the things that other people told me I was good at. And for me, that was like sort of images and descriptive language and, my poets, us with the poetic leanings. And when I was a kid, people were like, oh, these are beautiful images. And I was like, oh, I'll just keep pumping that iron and my beautiful images. And what happens when when I focus on the thing that I am good at and sort of hide there, is that I build this sort of shadow story that I'm bad at everything else, when actually I just haven't taken the time to learn it or practice it. And I had this one creative writing teacher in grad school who I was in workshop once, and Vijay, and we had the same teacher, and everybody's going around the workshop, as you do, saying really nice things and not always saying the truth. And he finally threw his head back and was like, "Ugh, Melissa, stop indulging your strengths." And it was like a gong went off in my head. And I'm sure other people had tried in tactful ways to communicate this to me. And I just didn't have the self-esteem to be able to absorb it, but I could then. And I was like, oh my God. And I wrote it on a little sticky note and stuck it over my desk. And I went and learned like plot structure and dialogue and just practiced those things until I was able at them. And now my creative process is like the opposite of what it used to be, where I start with the things I'm least confident in and sort of foreground those, because I know I'm going to spend a million years perfecting the sentences, because that's where my joy is. So I do that last.
Vijay, I have so many lines in my head from him.
I know.
He was such a good teacher. Man, similarly, I think I had to unlearn a little bit of what I learned in grad school. I learned how to write a lyric essay in grad school. And I'm really grateful for that, because I did not know what a lyric essay was until I went to an MFA program. But then I got really stuck in like lyricism for the sake of lyricism. And I think similarly, I wasn't telling a story, and I had to learn how to bring in and more confidently like dig into narrative. And I think even reading like the two pieces that I read tonight, like Driftless is really old. I wrote that when I was still in grad school, and you can tell like I like that piece. I still like it, but it is really, the lyricism is really heavy, and it is way more image driven than stuff I do now, which is way more narrative driven. And I still love a lyric essay. And I feel like that second piece I wrote is lyric too. There's a lot of lyricism and rhythm in it, but it's also narrative driven at the front end. So sometimes you learn amazing things, and then sometimes you have to figure out what your voice actually is, not just the voices you are taught and learn how to emulate in your MFA programs.
How are we doing on time? Cool. Anybody got a last question? Go for it.
Melissa Febos. Not joking. I don't know. Do I steal from you? Have I stole from you?
I mean, you're welcome to it.
Yeah. I don't know. We both worked with the writer Joanne Beard.
Oh my God, we have both burgled Joanne.
Burgled. Yeah, like wholesale stolen from Joanne Beard.
Yeah.
Joanne Beard, if you're interested, because I was a poet and then a fiction writer, and reading her work, specifically the book The Boys of My Youth, just proved to me that you could write nonfiction that read like fiction, that you could foreground aesthetics and story. And so like all of my first 10 essays I wrote were imitations of Joanne essays.
Yeah. I went
sure.
to grad school because Joanne was there.
Yeah.
I worked with Joanne. She was my thesis advisor. And I was like, well, I'm going to write a book exactly like Joanne Beard's, which was my thesis, I think.
She's an amazing person.
She's amazing.
Do you want to hear a little tiny bit of gossip? Stop the camera. Once in a workshop, Joanne answered a call from her therapist in the workshop.
Wait, I have another one. Once she got into her car, I'm not going to say who got in the car with her, but Eminem was in the CD player. I was like, you like Eminem too?
She's a wild lady. But I've stolen from Jeanette Winterson.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wait, you can be like super cerebral and super erotic at the same time? Ah.
That's a great question. We're always emulating people. We're always mimicking. I think when we're figuring out who we are as writers.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's something that I say to my students all the time. It's like, you don't have to do it consciously. You're already doing it. And part of your job in school is to figure out who you're imitating, like what lineage you already belong to. Awesome final question. Thank you guys so much.